Hey, it's Simon Carstens here, CEO of Elevate Sales, where we create exceptional salespeople through unlocking their full potential. Today I want to talk to you about some common mistakes I see with B2B salespeople that hold them back from closing more deals and are limiting their success. I'll take you through what I see as a typical sales situation I see most commonly, which highlights the trap salespeople fall into and why this happens. If you or your team are doing a whole lot of work engaging prospects or clients on opportunities, then after you've presented the offer, they go cold on you, well, this video is for you. I'll go into some common challenges salespeople encounter, the reasons for those, and I'll provide some strategies that can help solve them. But firstly, let's take a look at some of the common challenges salespeople face in selling. Following up and not getting an answer. Being asked to send us a proposal. Losing control over the sale and feeling like the prospect or client is in the driver's seat. Wasting time on dead-end leads. Not getting access to the decision maker and being kept down at the lower levels. Not sure which questions to ask. Frustrated with long, drawn-out sales cycles. Building credibility and rapport with decision makers, and needing more meetings with prospects. No repeatable process or formula for selling. Every deal is different. And lastly, how to handle objections well and turn those objections into a sale. And these are just some of the usual challenges. I'm sure you'll have more. But before I take you through a typical sales situation, there are a few concepts that are worthwhile understanding beforehand to bring to life why salespeople make those costly mistakes unwittingly. Now, firstly, let's look at the stereotype of a typical salesperson. Now, let's face it, people don't always have the best impression of salespeople. They've had a bad rap dating back centuries. Think back to the old days of door-to-door salesmen, snake-oiled used car salesmen, telemarketers, insurance peddlers, timeshare sales, and many more. They certainly have done the reputation of the honest salesperson a lot of harm. So when you think of words to describe the negative archetype of salesperson, what would you come up with? Well, when I ask people what labels or traits they associate with salespeople, they usually tell me that they're untrustworthy, pushy, dishonest, slick, insincere, selfish, and persistent. Now, of course, the majority of salespeople aren't like this, but a few bad actors have over time created this reputation and made it harder for the rest of us. When trying to understand the challenges faced by most modern buyers, it's important to recognize the impact of that stereotype and what it means to the process of selling. The main one being that buyers feel the need to protect themselves from salespeople. They need to create barriers. Yet buyers still need to engage salespeople for many things that they can't source without one. So these buyers feel the need to create defensive strategies to protect themselves. RFIs and RFPs. Give me the info and pricing I need and we'll engage with you if we want to talk further. Tenders. They tend to focus on price rather than the overall solution fit. Procurement departments, we probably all faced those in the past. Gatekeepers, keeping you at a distance between the salespeople and the actual decision makers. Send me a proposal or information, very common. Call me back later. No hawking policies at businesses, just to name a few. These strategies create a challenging environment for even the most professional, trustworthy salespeople and usually leads to longer sales cycles with less control over the process. Limited access to real decision makers, making it harder to understand their real needs. Increased price sensitivity as buyers commoditize the solutions. Difficulty differentiating your offer when everything is reduced to paperwork or price. Therefore, the seller must overcome these challenges to sell effectively. But if we think about the typical stereotype of a salesperson like we've just talked about, and if a salesperson walks in with a buyer, then they start talking like a typical salesperson, guess what? As I say, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then chances are it's a duck. If we start using language that typical salespeople use, we're going to look and sound like a salesperson, and that's likely to trigger conscious or subconscious protection mechanisms. So we obviously want to avoid that. An interrupt is when you do something unexpected or different to break the prospect's usual automatic response to salespeople. It grabs their attention and makes them more open to engaging with you because you've disrupted their typical defense mechanisms. So what are some of the key languages typical salespeople use? Well, here's a couple of examples. Budget. What's your budget? What's your decision-making process? Well, these trigger the buyer's defense mechanisms because they sound like traditional sales tactics. Instead of asking, what's your budget? You might want to use phrases like, what would you expect to invest? So far, we've looked into the history and stereotype of salespeople. Now we need to understand there's a psychology where the prospect feels they need to keep the salesperson at arm's length. Now let's look at how that plays out in a typical sales situation. Okay, so we've got a buyer here, and I use the word buyer in inverted commas because they might not be and often aren't actually buying. They could be shopping around, price checking, tire kicking, but we'll still call them buyers for the purposes of this demonstration. The buyer is appearing interested. They ask for information. They might be demonstrating buying signals, asking lots of questions, seemingly highly engaged and interested. The seller then reacts to this, believing they have a live opportunity on the go. They engage in fact-finding. And depending on what they're selling, they might bring other people from the company in to run workshops or meetings, often giving away valuable IP to demonstrate their capability and willingness to solve the customer or prospect's needs. Now, this could be very technical in nature depending on what's being sold. So the buyer is acting motivated at this point as they string along the seller, receiving the information and attention required. The seller then gets excited, investing time and energy for themselves and often a team back at their office to prepare a proposal and pricing. They get what we call happy ears or commission breath. The seller then goes away and spends hours or even days building a solution and writing up a proposal. They then present their offering, sending the proposal to the buyer, providing demos, statements of work, or whatever the business does as part of their sales process. The buyer then obtains the information. They get what they want at this point. The seller thinks they've reached the point of the process where they want to close the deal. They feel they've earned the right to the business after providing everything the customer has asked for. And this is when things start to go off track. The buyer moves into avoidance mode and starts building walls to avoid commitment. Now remember the psychology we talked about earlier. They start making excuses, changing their story. All of a sudden there are other people in the decision-making process. There's no budget, something has changed, or the classic, they need to think about it. Now, does any of this sound familiar? The seller at this point moves into defensive mode, looking to handle objections and stalls. They're starting to stress out. They've probably called the deal out to their bosses in the bag, or it's in the forecast. People in the seller's company might be asking questions about how the deal's going. Now, of course, they're feeling very stressed and anxious about the deal at this point. Now the buyer does a Houdini and disappears. Calls go to voicemail. They're in a meeting. Call me back in a month. It's gone to the board for approval. Or most commonly, ghosting. They ignore you completely. The only option is for the seller to continue chasing the buyer down. Maybe their boss steps in and attempts to salvage the deal. Or worse still, they send through a sizable discount trying to hook some attention. If you buy before the end of the month, we can give you a discount to get the deal over the line. So can you see what's happening here between the buyer and the seller? The seller's lost control of the process, right? And where do you think they've lost that power? At the obtain information stage. We've given them what they've asked for. They have our solution, they have our pricing, and now they can compare us to other providers and get back to you if they feel like it. So you're no longer of value to them unless they want to buy from you. Can you also see this looks like an automated response? They do this, we do that, they express interest, we go fact-finding, they act motivated, we present a proposal. So what happens when the prospect is in control of the sales process? Well, the person who's asking the questions is in control, and if the buyer is in control, they're going to start asking us questions. And if we don't take control, how many questions do you think they're going to let us ask? Well, it's normally around 3 to 5 questions. So unless we take control right at the beginning of the meeting, we can't ask enough questions before being taken over by the prospect. And then the first point plays out. We haven't been able to understand their needs well enough. Then that leads to features and benefits type conversations. Then to point 2, our solutions are presented to undefined problems since we haven't been able to identify those problems through deep questioning. which then leads to point 3. Our closing efforts are not helpful or at the right time. And if we haven't covered off their needs adequately, we won't have covered off our point satisfactorily and therefore determined the right time to close. And then to point 4, we waste a lot of energy on chasing deals. Okay, so we know that the traditional sales process doesn't work, that the buyer creates barriers and distance between us to get the information they're seeking, and has us reacting to their request instead of the seller leading the process. And we've got this concept called pattern interrupt, where we can break out of the typical salesperson model and do things differently to lessen or avoid the likely reactions and barriers from our buyers. We want to be on an equal footing with our buyer and take control of the sales process to ensure we get the chance to understand in great detail what's going on in their world so we can provide solutions that match their defined problems. And we don't sell like the usual salespeople who just ford through the same old standard features and benefits pricing templates, hoping something will land. We want to ensure our solution matches exactly the pain points the customer has and solves them better than any competitors. We also want to ensure that the precious time we spend on opportunities is with companies who are in the market to buy. They're not window shopping, tire kicking, or comparing their current supplier's pricing, and they're not coming to you for some free advice they can use to improve their current solution. And that happens all the time, and that's free consulting. You want customers ready to buy today. And I see this every day with my clients. I use a typical example here. For every 10 people showing interest in their service, on average they get 2 to 3 price checkers. That's those just comparing their current suppliers with others in the market. They might get 2 to 3 looking for free consulting and 2 just looking for information. And then perhaps 2 to 3 are actively looking in the market to buy. But how many proposals are they writing? 10. Meetings, calls, follow-ups, 10 or more. If they just spent their time on the 2 to 3 who are ready to buy, they would have saved a lot of time they could have used finding other prospects who were ready to buy. Does that resonate with you? Now that we've identified the problem, what's the solution to all of this? What we need now is a sales process or formula that puts the power back in the seller's hands that addresses all the problems I've identified. I want to introduce you to a framework that I use myself and offer to my clients from Sandler, which addresses the very challenges that I've covered in this video. Now, Sandler is one of the largest and most established sales training and development companies globally, and this method has been refined and perfected over time, and I believe it works. Now, I've used many different sales methodologies over my 30+ years in sales: Taz, Spin, Miller-Heiman, Challenger, and plenty of others. And it's one that I think is best suited for demand creating sales roles, which really means any sales roles where you have to go find clients, sell your solutions to solve real problems, not deals that come to you on a silver platter with an attached PO number. It's a framework and not a script, so it needs to be adapted to your business. Every business is unique, but the same principles apply. So you follow the same 7 steps, though you adapt them to your specific company, industry, and selling situation. Okay, so let's take a look and see how to address the challenges we've talked about. The first one is communication. It starts off with bonding and rapport. Now, I believe that people do business with people they like and trust. Would you agree? Bonding and rapport is the first and most important piece, because if we're not in rapport with our prospect or customer, then the buyer is unlikely to purchase from you. Now, the Sandler selling system is built on what they call no pressure sales process. We want to build rapport and not have any pressure on anyone throughout the process, that we can just work through what needs to be worked through and then see if it makes sense to go to the next step or not. So fundamentally, what we say about rapport is that we've got more things in common than we don't have in common. And if we've got things that are not in common, we don't tend to focus on them. You know how people used to say, don't talk about politics or religion, because it's likely to be something that you won't have in common, and that could be dangerous in a conversation. So we really want to focus on the things that we do have in common. Now, if we don't know the person at all, the thing that we all have in common is communication. So we all communicate, and we can be similar in the way that we communicate. Now, if we don't know the person at all, the thing that we do have in common is communication. So we all communicate, and we can be similar in the way that we communicate, and we automatically do this because we're social creatures. So you'll see it specifically where we don't do this. One person turns to face everyone in an elevator, which feels awkward because someone hasn't conformed to the group. So when we first meet someone, we can observe the way that they communicate, the types of language they use, the tonality, such as how fast they're talking, how loud they're speaking, the type of tone they're using, and of course their body language. And we all automatically match and mirror. Then we want to observe if we break that rapport, because if we've broken it and we're not in agreement with our communication, then there's going to end up being no deal. Which one of these three body languages would you typically associate with breaking of rapport first? Words, tonality, or body language? That's right, body language for sure. It might be laying back in a chair, or if you're standing up, it could be stepping to the side or arms crossed. Once you observe a break in body language and rapport, you can make a decision whether to do something about it or not. One of the ways you can bring buyers back into rapport is talk to them. Hey, I've noticed we've changed the topic. Does it make sense for us to leave it? Or should we go back to the previous one? Now in this example, I made a judgment call when I noticed a break in rapport, and I could sense the buyer didn't want to talk about it. So if it's a gap and you feel it, say it. And because I brought it up and addressed it, they unfold their arms and went, yeah, it's not relevant for us right now. Great, no problem, we can leave it there, and we're back into rapport again. The next step is the upfront contract. Have you ever been in a meeting where you didn't know how long it was for? Didn't know what the agenda was? Didn't know what the intended outcomes of the meeting were? Or didn't know who else was going to be in the meeting? All of those things can be solved by having an upfront contract. So what is it? It's a verbal agreement. It's an agreement of what we're going to do in the meeting moving forward. And if we don't cover off how long we've got, what tends to happen? Well, what are the prospects going to do? They're going to cut it short or get their free consulting. For agenda or expectation, we want to let them know our agenda. And what's our agenda? Our agenda is to control the sales process, right? So how do we control the sales process? Well, we get permission to ask a lot of questions. And I'll give you an example of this in a second. And then we'll need to pattern interrupt because they think we're there to sell them something, but we're not. We're there to assess whether we're talking to the right prospect. And we're going to talk about outcomes, and that means we're going to agree whether it makes sense to go to the next step or not. So what does that sound like in a meeting? Hey, Mr. Prospect, how are you? Great to see you. The purpose of our meeting today is to work through what's happening with your sales team. Do you still have 45 minutes as agreed for our discussion? Fantastic. Often when we sit down and have these types of meetings, you might have some questions for me, things you'd like to talk about. Just wondering in advance if you can let me know what those topics are. I'll just write those down, thank you. Okay, off role play. Okay, so if I didn't say I'm just going to write those down, the trap is that we fall into them starting to talk about their topics. And what's going to happen? They're going to start talking, they're going to take over. And if I start answering their questions, then I can fall into that buyer-seller trap that we talked about previously. So we'll just continue with that upfront contract scenario. For us to get to those particular agenda points that you've given me, I'll need to ask you a lot of questions, probably more than you're used to, but it's so I can really understand what's going on for you. Is that okay? Great. And is it okay if we spend 5 to 10 minutes at the end of our meeting to talk through if it makes sense for us to go to the next step or not? And it might end up being a no from you or a no from me, but look, that's okay. I just want to make sure we've got a little extra time at the end set aside for that and what the next steps might be. Off role play. So what did you think of that upfront contract? Summarizing the components of an upfront contract, we've got time and purpose. How much time have we got allocated for the meeting and what are we here for? Prospect, what's their agenda? Do they have any particular expectations from the meeting? Your role, what would you like from the meeting? Outcome, what decisions or conclusions would you like reached? And lastly, concerns. Are there any concerns or worries needing to be raised about the process? The next step is pain. Now when we go into the pain step, we're identifying the reasons for doing business. We want to go really deep into qualifying and understanding what's going on in the prospect's business. And it's not just about what the problem is, It's also about how long that problem has been going on for and what the specific issues are that they're dealing with. Also, what are the cost implications to their business and how are they feeling about that? Most salespeople take the buyer's word for it when they're told what the problem is, but often the actual pain is quite different to the one being stated when you drill down a little deeper. Pain is not the surface level problem that buyers bring you. For example, they're paying too much or they need to stop manual processes. Pain is an underlying, compelling, emotional reason to change. It's the why behind the what. If you can understand and solve the root cause of the problem, you'll be much more likely to gain the buyer's trust and get a sale. People buy an emotion and justify with logic, so we must get to the core of the emotional impacts of an issue to truly understand it. So to explore this pain, we need to investigate it on 3 levels. The first are the surface level problems. These are the issues that buyers willingly share for their reasons to be talking with you. And as I said, paying too much, manual processes, etc. The next are the reasons or root causes of why the problems exist. You'll need to uncover whether the buyer has tried to fix the problem and how successful or unsuccessful those efforts have been. The third level is impact. This refers both to the financial impact of the problem on the business, as well as the impact of the problem on individuals you're talking with. How much of a person's or team's day does this problem take up? How much is that time worth? Frustration, cost of not doing other projects. Is this $100, $100,000, or $1 million problem? What does it mean for the person in terms of credibility if they can't fix it? What would it mean to them and their role if the pain were fixed? Only when you've quantified each and every source of pain for the prospect will you have the complete picture of how you need to solve the problems and what a solution could look like for them. By investing time with your prospect, really digging deep and asking a lot of questions here, you will likely have a much clearer picture than your competitors on the pain landscape and how you can solve it. Next, we move on to the investment step. Investment isn't just about the dollars a prospect is willing to spend. That's usually where the average salesperson stops, if they even cover off investment. Ultimately, your buyer needs to be willing and able to make 3 types of investments to obtain an ROI or return on investment. The first is money, so that's the financial resources or budget. Secondly, resources, staff, materials, including time spent in implementation or training. And lastly, effort, how much work they're putting into the investment. The investment step is not just about uncovering how much a prospect is comfortable spending, it's also about uncovering what resources they've got and can allocate to a project, anticipated timelines they're working to, and time they need to allocate to the project. If we feel there's a good fit with the prospect having all the investment criteria met, then we can move on to the decision step. The decision step is all about understanding the buyer's decision-making process and what they need to see and hear to be able to make a decision one way or another. When? What's their timeline? Why? Why are they needing to make a decision, and what are the impacts if they don't make a decision? What needs to happen at each step of the process? Who, apart from them, is involved in the decision-making process? Where does this need to happen? And how it needs to happen? All of that examination breaks down the decision-making process so we know what needs to happen at every step of the way. So when you're done presenting your proposal and looking to close, you know exactly what needs to happen to get your deal signed off by the prospect. No more surprises or fibs like it needs to go to the board or I need to talk to my manager, because you already know what the steps are. And when we're happy to move forward, assuming that you've qualified the prospect correctly through the pain, budget, and decision steps, then we can move forward to the final stage of presenting the solution and closing the sale. Unlike most sales presentations, yours won't be a generic presentation about your product and service. Instead, it'll be a customized presentation that directly addresses the prospect's pain points and desired outcomes that you've already identified during the pain step and the budget step. As you present your solution, you'll explicitly tie each feature or aspect of your solution to the prospect's pain points. This makes it clear that your offer isn't just a random assortment of features, it's a solution designed to fix their specific issues. Closing the sale is presenting to their pain, budget, and decision-making process. and so we present to them on that level. And we get confirmation along the way that your solution is going to solve their problems based on how your solution matches to the pain you've uncovered, the budget you've determined, and how they make decisions. Then we move on to the post-sales step. This is a step that most salespeople ignore, but it's really about ensuring long-term satisfaction and minimizing buyer's remorse. It's the final step of the process, but in many ways, it's what ensures your relationship with a client continues to thrive and grow. We reassure them that they made a smart, well thought out decision, then we review the reasons why your solution is the best fit for their needs. Then we discuss what happens next in detail, and this might include timelines, deliverables, next steps, and how do you communicate moving forward. So by nurturing the relationship and making sure the client is happy, you're also opening doors for future business. As we conclude, I'd like to recap. I started this video talking about the challenges so many B2B salespeople face today. These include how the negative views of salespeople held by buyers makes selling a challenge in today's market. Buyers build walls to keep salespeople at arm's length. They act interested to get attention, but when they receive the pricing and information, they often go cold and hide from the seller. I've taken you through the buyer-seller dynamic, highlighting the control buyers typically have over the salesperson. Then I introduced the Sandler selling system, where I demonstrated how salespeople can take control of the sales process through understanding the buyer-seller sales dynamic. Then they can use pattern interrupt to stop looking and acting like a typical salesperson. They can wisely use the Sandler 7-step process to develop great communication and rapport building skills, then delve deeply into their prospect's pain or reasons for doing business, understand their decision-making process, and after they've fully understood all of that in a way that most salespeople usually don't, they're in a very strong position to offer their solution in a way that specifically solves the prospect's pain in accordance with their budget and in alignment with their decision-making process. Too many salespeople go straight in with a formulaic features and benefits sell without truly understanding what's going on in their prospect's world. They send through a proposal, then hope for the best, just like throwing a coin in the wishing well. They follow it with prospects just to be ignored or kept at distance with no clear next step or line of sight to close the deal. They fall into the dead zone where deals go to die and all that hard work gets wasted. With a selling system or formula such as Sandler, the salesperson can take the power back, really understand the prospect's needs, outshine the competition, and create exceptional sales results. Thanks for watching today. Please leave any questions or comments down below. I'll be happy to answer them. Happy selling.